So we obviously gold has the much longer track record. And it works, even if the internet goes down, I mean, you can still use gold and silver to transact. And it's basically gold is the highest stock to flow ratio commodity, meaning that the supply inflation rate per year compared to the existing estimated stock that exists is very low, something like you know uh, 1.5% per year on average of supply growth. So if you imagine a money that had a 1.5% supply inflation rate, broad money supply growth over the long term, that'd be a pretty attractive money compared to most other currencies. The dollar grows, it's on average something like 7% per year. Most emerging market currencies grow much faster than that, whereas gold is basically this very slow supply growth currency. And it's something that there's no central authority that can just print more of it, and so that's why it's had this very long track record of holding its value. Plus, it's nearly indestructible in the chemical sense. Um, the shortcomings are basically its portability and speed, right? So you can't use gold to transact with someone in another country unless you abstract it in some way. It's basically only suitable for local commerce. And as once we put undersea telecommunications cables in the late 1800s, we've been able to transact globally much faster than we can move around gold. And so we had to abstract gold more than it already was at that point in order to basically keep up. And then it was able to be dropped away from the money system other than as, kind of these opaque sovereign reserves. Um, and whereas Bitcoin, there's multiple advantages. One, it's basically it's as scarce as gold, but then it moves as fast as fiat. You can settle a multi-billion-dollar transaction in an hour. Basically it depends on how much confirmations you want to wait for.
Mhm.
But basically, it's a very quick network at coming to a final settlement for all practical purposes. And then with things like Lightning, you can do these instantaneous payments on top of it. And so it's basically this very efficient system that in some ways combines the strengths of both fiat and gold, with the downside being that because it's open source, anyone can copy it. And so kind of like how gold is sometimes under threat from, say, paper claims on gold, people that
Mhm.
think they own gold, but that, if kind of the music were to stop, not all those claims are maybe tied to an ounce of gold.
Mhm.
You kind of see the same thing in Bitcoin in the sense that, you can have literally tens of thousands of altcoins come around, and then that can dilute market share and market and network value if that kind of persists for a long period of time. And so basically, it has to fight for market share among thousands of other alternatives. Um, and so that's, I think, a very long process. And of course, it's only a 13-year-old asset. There's always risks of bugs. There have been some bugs in the past. Um, One thing I like to point out is that Bitcoin, it's had 100% uptime since 2013,
Mhm.
which not even Fedwire has. And so it's a shockingly robust system, but it's not without tail risks and bugs that could, disrupt it. And so, I think that in many ways Bitcoin is an improvement on gold, but it's not superior in every possible variable. There's still kind of a role for gold as well. When I when you look at gold, so an individual gold coin doesn't have any more energy cost.
Mhm.
However, any sort of like transactions or using gold in any sort of economic sense does have an ongoing cost because it takes time and energy, various types of
Mhm.
resources to move it around. And so the ongoing cost of storage, transportation, and repeatedly verifying that it is indeed gold does have an ongoing cost. And so, there is some truth to the fact that, if you have, say, gold in your house, that is, that's there for as long as you want it to. It is what it is. But the actual, quote unquote gold network does have an ongoing energy cost. Well, so I think what we're seeing in Europe it's a combination of problems. Obviously, there's
Mhm.
underinvestment, and then you can get away with certain shortcomings if certain risks don't occur. Whereas in this case, it did occur. You had Russia's causing problems, and then also you have record droughts in that region. So you have like a
Mhm.
1-2 punch that's really kind of hitting them in all of the vulnerable parts around their energy grid. And for something like that, there's not a whole lot that Bitcoin can fix.
Mhm.
But what I find interesting about, the relationship between Bitcoin and energy is that, people when we talk about a resource cost for Bitcoin using energy, the kind of the first assumption is that's all bad. Basically, it's any
Yeah.
sort of energy expenditure is a bad thing. Whereas we actually find that because of the unique way that Bitcoin consumes energy, it actually can be used to solve some energy problems. It's still a pretty small scale because the total energy expenditures, several billion dollars, but it's not like hundreds of billions of dollars or anything like that, yeah, per year. So it's still pretty small, but it can be used to kind of fix certain little issues. And one thing I like to point out, because a lot of people that don't have a background in electricity in various ways don't know, is how non-fungible a lot of our energy is,
Hmm.
right? And so they think that if you produce electricity and you use it to mine Bitcoin, that you could have used it for something else. Where actually in many cases there's no other source of demand in that
It's wasted,
time.
right?
It's
Yeah.
wasted, right?
Yep.
So we actually waste a profound amount of energy, both on grid and off grid.
Hmm.
And there's really no way around it. These are just frictions of doing business. And so, for example, if you bring oil out of the ground and it's a small isolated well and it comes with some natural gas, the question becomes, what do you do with that natural gas? If it's not enough to have a pipeline built to you, and it's not enough to, kind of collect it all and get it out there, a lot of times they'll just burn it. They'll literally just either vent it into the atmosphere or they're just light energy, perfectly good energy on fire.
Yeah.
And so what Bitcoin can do is Bitcoin, because it's unique in the sense that, you know, even though the network has to be online all the time, any individual miner can shut off and the network
Hmm.
is fine. And so they can just go on and off very quickly. And they don't, unlike a data center, they don't need high bandwidth. So they don't need
Hmm.
high uptime and they don't need high bandwidth. So they have this unique ability to go out to these remote locations and just suck up stranded energy. So it's like you can go to an oil well and say, hey, instead of just burning that natural gas away, how about we just use it to power this electric motor and then um, mine some Bitcoin with it. So either
Yeah.
way, we're going to use it, but let's actually use it economically. Yeah, it's actually kind of remarkable how many different areas this applies to, because that's one of the most obvious examples. But there's multiple other ones too. For example, the reason that so much mining happened in China until
Hmm.
they kind of cracked down on it was that they had all this extra hydro capacity, right?
Hmm.
So they built all this hydro that was away from the cities, and not all of that was being used. And so, during the wet season, Bitcoin miners would go over to that region and basically get all this nearly free energy because it's literally otherwise just curtailed. It's not actually being used for anything. And so it's super cheap for them to access. And we also see it, use Texas as an example. They have a pretty high allocation of renewable energy
Hmm.
or variable energy, solar and wind. And because they have that closed grid system, that can be pretty challenging. And so one thing that you kind of see occurring is both in Texas and that whole region is the occurrence of negative electricity prices.
Hmm.
Which at first sounds like a good thing, but then you realize basically what that's signaling is that energy is being produced and there's no one in that time and place that can use that energy productively. And so you either have to
Hmm.
try to pay someone to take it off your hands, or you just curtail it.
Curtail. Yep.
And so basically having a variable source of electricity consumption actually can help stabilize the grid and can make some of those variable production sources more economic on the margins. It basically affect how that relates to grid stability.